Welcome to Transform Now, the podcast brought to you by robotic process automation pioneer Blue Prism. Digital transformation has the potential to reshape the way companies service their customers, engage their employees, and manage their operations. Whether you're looking to develop strategies, tactics, and best practices to positively impact the future of work, or you're curious to learn how other companies have successfully navigated their digital transformation programs, then this podcast is for you. We're here to help you transform now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brad Hairston with Blue Prism. Welcome to the Transform Now podcast. Today, I am really excited to have as my guest Dr. Ed Challis, the CEO and co-founder of infer, a UK-based AI company and a partner of Blue Prism. I'm going to be talking with Ed about how infer can help bridge the gap between humans and machines. Ed, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Brad. Yeah, it's really great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
You bet. So why don't you start us off with an introduction?
Yeah, great. So my name's Ed. I'm one of the co-founders. I'm the CEO of infer. I came to found this business out of my research in machine learning and AI. My whole career's been in that space. So I originally was really interested in brains and psychology and neuroscience, but also maths, right? And so I got from there into mathematical theories of neuroscience, and then from there into machine learning, and that's been my whole career, right? That space of machine learning and AI. And I've always been more interested in the things that you can do with machine learning rather than just pure research. So that's how I got here, really.
Excellent. So Ed, infer often gets described as a communications intelligence platform that makes communications data understandable and actionable at scale. Can you explain this for us?
Yeah, for sure. So I think there's two really key words, I think, in that description. And probably the most important is the scale piece, right? So communications data is really like all of the data that gets recorded from the conversations that we have. So all of the email conversations, the web chat conversations, and there's so many channels now of digital communications, right? So we're in some platform now. I think on my phone, on my home screen, I have like 5 different chat apps, a couple of different email apps. We have so many different forms of digital communications in our lives now. But when you look at a business, they're having tens of thousands of conversations a day. And it's that scale piece. Every conversation in and of itself is understandable, is actionable, but making sense of them at scale, that's tricky, right? And so I think in terms of myself, in terms of building a business, it's just so critical to understand what all of the stakeholders are saying, right? What are the customers saying? What are the investors saying? What are the employees? What's the team saying? And to make sense of that data, that's how you steer the kind of ship. But when you're a large organization, how do you understand all of those conversations and act on them optimally? It becomes really, really hard because you're depending on so many different people to do that work, right? And so that's where I think machine learning has something really unique to offer in terms of understanding all of that data and processing it more efficiently.
And Ed, what is it that makes all these various forms of business communication so complex?
Yeah, so I think sometimes they're not even complex, right? So if you think about, I don't know, all of the emails that you receive, right? Some of them are so simple. Some of them you're just like, oh, okay, that email, I just need to forward that on to somebody else, right? Some of them I know the answer offhand and I can just reply instantly. So they're not always complex. There's often just a lot of them. Right. And so that's something that's like something that needs to be acknowledged. There's actually loads and loads of low value transactional kind of work that people have to do in these channels. So that's one of the things. But then I think the complexity comes from thinking about like, why do you have a conversation in business? It's like typically there's only 2 reasons for a conversation, right? Which is something is potentially going to go wrong, or someone anticipates something going wrong, and that kind of thing needs to get resolved, right? Or there's an opportunity which needs to be seized, right? And so if something's really standard and business as usual, then often there's no real conversation associated with it, right? It's just like the automated kind of processes in the business, the self-service functionality is handling it, and everything's just going according to plan. But the second there's a conversation, typically that's when there's something more interesting, right? It's an exception in some sense. And I think that's where the complexity comes from. I think there's a kind of spectrum from simple to complex, but then there's all of this kind of, the root cause reason for a conversation is often really tied to value, both kind of a loss of value through some negative event or the potential to get some kind of real positive thing, like basically sell it, make a deal, sell some product, sell some service. So yeah, that's one of the things. But then I think one of the things that separates business communications from maybe more kind of consumer, like the B2B conversations from the kind of B2C conversations, is there tends to be more nuance and idiosyncrasy. So businesses and their counterparties and how they do this work, they, all of these kind of micro communities develop their own language and their own ways of talking about the products and services and processes that they're running. So that is one element of complexity that exists in these kind of business communications.
Right. Ed, I know that Reinfer works with a variety of communication channels. Is email the primary channel that companies use Reinfer to interpret in your experience?
Yeah, that is probably one of the biggest channels for us.
Okay.
Because it's still such a huge channel of communications, right? It's one of the oldest electronic form of communications, but it's really, really huge. And so, yeah, we do loads and loads of emails for our customers, but also chats and service tickets and notes and all of these other forms of communication, which you wouldn't traditionally think of in all kind of workflow and BPM tools. There's effectively conversations happening in those platforms. So yeah, it's quite diverse, but emails is definitely one of the biggest ones.
Yeah, it's good to know that. I'll have to tell my two sons in their 20s who tell me that email is dead. I'll have to I'll have to remind them that it's not quite in the ground yet. Let's talk about Reinfer's natural language processing capability and the AI behind it. How do you teach Reinfer to interpret conversations?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different aspects to that. The first kind of component to that is, how do machines understand human language? And that's really that whole question, that whole problem statement is really the whole like field of what computer scientists called NLP, natural language processing. How do you get a machine to understand human language and interpret what's being said there? Right. That area has been studied for as long as computers have been around, right? Probably even older, right? The people have been thinking about how you could encode logical rules to unpick the meaning of a sentence or something. But that field of NLP has gone through a tremendous, like a few kind of revolutions almost in how that problem is attacked over the last 10 years. And so the first kind of real advancements that came in NLP over that period is probably around 10 years ago, with applying these kind of techniques called deep learning to natural language processing. And deep learning is just a kind of cool name for these statistical models. They're statistical in their nature, basically, which seek to replicate how the brain works. So in a human brain, you have an incredibly huge number of neurons. You have like 10 to the 11 neurons, so which is just a massive, like it's practically an astronomical number of neurons. And then each of these things have 10,000 connections, right? So this insanely complex structure. But really, what's happening is these kind of neurons, kind of the connections they get with the other neurons kind of change in relation to the statistical properties of the data, the experience that your brain has, basically. And so this whole modern approach to machine learning and AI is to try and replicate this kind of properties of neurons in populations by exposing them to data, training data. And so 10 years ago, there was a real advancement in deep learning, primarily that came about just from computers being so much better, right? So Moore's law means that computers are doubling in speed every 18 months and that you can get more and more compute for a fixed budget. And so, yeah, deep learning became really, really popular about 10 years ago and has just snowballed since then. And then I think about 24 months ago, there was this real revolution in how those deep networks were structured. And there's this kind of modern architecture now of these deep networks, which are called transformer networks. And they're just fantastically good at NLP. Yeah. And I don't think this has really hit the economy yet. And we're starting to see just so many more problems fall to this way of approaching natural language processing. So the platform's really built on these kind of transformer-based approaches to natural language processing. But then there's a kind of problem with how this natural language processing is really studied and developed. So the biggest people, the biggest kind of research institute in the world really for machine learning and AI is Google, right? It's probably like a factor of 10 bigger than the next biggest research institute, which I would guess would be Microsoft's. So it's like Google and then 10 times, I'm guessing, this is probably all good, but it's like pretty much everyone that works in machine learning works at Google. It's kind of 90% true. And so, but those guys, they tend to focus on problems where there's just an incredible amount of data, right? So like Google's internet, right? The Google is the internet. It's kind of internet scale problems. But if you're a bank or an insurer, you might have, or like an e-commerce business, you might have like 10 different teams that have really high volume communications channels. And then you might have 10 people in each team, right? Now they might be having like 100,000 conversations a year in each of those teams or something of that order of magnitude. But 100,000 sounds really big. It's not super big, actually. Right? And then that's 100,000 conversations they're having. But then if you want to put some machine learning in that channel, you need to train the system up. So you need some kind of labeled training data. And that takes time to collect, right? And time to annotate effectively. A subject matter expert has to create these training sets. And that's something, this training data is a super scarce resource and super rare and expensive to get. And so in re-infer, the key thing is like, how do you train an accurate model with really limited amount of human supervision, this kind of training, this annotation effort? And that's something that's like really key to the platform is how can a business person, someone who understands the customer, the processes, the tasks that need to be done, how can they teach the machine learning model, the AI, how to extract kind of business relevant information from these conversations? And that's really where all of our R&D and development effort goes into, is making that process of teaching the model super efficient and easy and almost pleasurable. You know, it should be like onboarding someone into a new team. If you hire someone straight out of college, like you explain to them like what happens in this part of the business, and it should be a kind of back and forth almost, right? Like a conversation where you teach them how stuff works around here, you know, and what customers want and how we serve them and what our processes are. It shouldn't be this laborious kind of data collection exercise.
Right. And what level of accuracy can be achieved with natural language processing with all these advancements that you described?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think kind of more important than the level of accuracy is actually knowing what that accuracy is, right? So some tasks are super simple and you can get 100% accuracy, right?
Right.
And you can get 100% accuracy with very little training data. And then some tasks are really hard, right? And people wouldn't agree, right? I mean, I don't know if you've ever had that situation, Brad, where you've left a meeting and you're talking to your colleague after the meeting and you're saying, what did that other person mean? They told us 3 times. You have a debate about what someone actually meant. They told you what they meant, but you don't know what it means. And that's at the heart of what NLP is, kind of deciphering what someone's true intent is, right? From what came out of their mouth or what they wrote. And that's often when you get an email, sometimes you're like, what does that person mean by that sentence? You know, I don't know what they're actually trying to get at. So some things are really simple and you can get them 100% correct. But you could show the same sentence to 10 people and everyone have a different opinion about what it actually means. And all those things, you know, you kind of everything descends. So it really depends. But what we think is important is that transparency on accuracy. So in the platform, it shows you how accurate it is and how accurate it thinks it is. And that's something you need to get really calibrate, because, you know, if me and you both read the same email from a customer or something and I'd be like, I think he means this, but I wouldn't be certain that he means it. So I'd be like, I'm pretty sure he means this, but maybe I'm wrong, 60% chance.
Yeah.
And you'd be like, oh, I think it could mean this other thing, but maybe I'm wrong. So but that level of confidence you have in the thing is really critical, and not just making a kind of binary decision, it is X or it is Y.
Yeah. Well, we have an Amazon Echo in our house, and it seems like Alexa is getting better and better at interpreting what I'm saying to her. So if that's any gauge,
none of those products would exist without deep learning, right? Like none of that stuff is feasible, and it's just starting to get going. Also, there's an amazing inventions just in the kind of microphone technology, the fidelity of those recordings.
Right.
So good.
So Ed, what would you say are the top benefits that companies can realize from natural language processing?
Yeah, so obviously there are all of these advantages around being more efficient and automating more, which is really easy to build a business case from, right? And you're super familiar with this, right? Which is, so many business cases for RPA are built off the back of time back to the business. If I automate away a task which was being done manually, what's the net benefit of that for the organization, right? And we have exactly the same kind of properties, right? So there's loads of situations where we help our clients auto-route a request to the right team, which can remove some manual work, auto-populate like a case management system, which is effectively like a keying in job, auto-respond if it's a transactional kind of repetitive query. There's loads of advantages like that, and that's great. And also you have all of these other kind of secondary benefits around resolving the query faster and getting people the information they need when they need it. And that's great, right? But for me, the thing that I think is so much more valuable than that, which is giving all of the decision makers in a business that visibility to what the entire customer base is saying, or what all of the suppliers are saying, right? That's something which is, it's almost like invaluable, right? So if I design the pricing for our products, I can't listen to all of the sales calls. If I'm setting the pricing strategy,
right.
So if you can give the pricing person visibility on how everyone walks about your pricing and what their feedback is, that's incredibly valuable, right? If I sit in the product development team and I hear everyone complain about these features and ask for these other features, that's transformative. That's much harder to put a dollar value on, but it's structurally so much more valuable than the automation piece.
Do you think NLP is one of the foundational components of true digital transformation?
I do, yeah, I do. And of course I'm biased, right? So I do. But I mean, I think you just need to take it like you can't, I mean, you just do a thought experiment, right? Like, what do you do at work? If I recorded what you do, Brad, I mean, I would say, if I just took a really kind of simplistic analysis of what you do at work, I would say you're either like reading and listening or you're like talking and typing, right?
Yeah.
So there's so much like low value work in those flows, right? There's so much opportunity to automate away that stuff and then to synthesize it and give it to the right stakeholders. If you're a knowledge worker, that's kind of all you do, right? So I would say it's equivalent to an engine to the, like kind of mechanical movement to the manufacturing industry. It's like everything is predicated on that capability.
Yeah. I can see how re-infer has applicability across all industries. In which industries have you gained the most traction in the initial years that the company has been in existence?
Yeah, great question. So we actually started off in the retail space, like in the e-commerce space.
Okay.
And that's amazing, actually, because in that industry, e-commerce, because it's obviously born kind of digital first, that whole industry has a real kind of measurement culture that you have to measure and continuously improve. You continuously improve the business through measurement, and it's also a kind of automation first culture as well, right? Because of the nature of the business. But recently we've been working loads with kind of financial services businesses. So banks, the scale of digital communications in financial services is really staggering. A decent sized bank will send and receive billions of messages a year. right, across the whole organization. Similarly, in insurance, we see a very similar scale. It's really at the heart of how those businesses operate. And then you see the same in so many different spaces as well, like telcos, manufacturing companies, any place where there's just kind of white collar workers. It's the core of how that business works. But yeah, so recently it's been heavily focused on financial services, but yeah, as you say, across all industries.
Let's talk about the Blue Prism re-infer partnership. How do RPA and the NLP capability of re-infer complement each other? Could you speak to that?
Yeah, it's quite deep, right? So the first thing to say is that re-infer has no RPA capability, right? I really think of it as we're like a kind of translation mechanism, right? Between communications data and then kind of machine readable and structured data, right? So in a sense, they're very, very different. Whenever we're automating a process, we're just reading the message, reading the inbound communication, and then that triggers an RPA process off the back of it, right? So that's how it worked in an end-to-end implementation. But then it's also kind of deeper than that as well, because one of the big use cases around us is analyzing all of those communications to uncover, as I was going back to that beginning of the conversation, like those problems in the business, right? 2 reasons for a conversation, something's going wrong or something that's like an opportunity to be seized. So by doing this communications mining, you uncover all of these opportunities for digital transformation, right? And so many of those end up actually being pure RPA opportunities. Right. So often one of the reasons you have a conversation is because something further up in the process was done wrong. Maybe because it was done manually or it was done late or 2 systems didn't talk to each other. So many conversations are actually a kind of a consequent or a symptomatic of there being an automation opportunity further upstream. So beyond just automating, it's also we help find just pure RPA opportunities as well.
Ed, can you share a success story where re-infer and Blue Prism combine to solve a customer pain point?
Yeah, there's a bunch. So, I mean, I'm not sure I'm allowed to mention the names of the actual firms, but
no worries.
One of the biggest ones is in a kind of tier 1 bank. So the organization receives hundreds of millions of emails a year across thousands of these kind of shared mailboxes. And typically every single one of those messages is a job that needs to be done, right? There's a request for some work to be done. And the scale is so significant, right, that in each of these teams, someone typically has this job of like manually routing and triaging the requests. The reason that job is done manually is because the communications, the emails, the messages, the service tickets aren't structured. And so there's really nice use cases, and these are replicated in those of other industries as well, where we're reading the messages, interpreting the nature of the request, extracting the pertinent information like the customer ID or the order number, and then Blue Prism's kind of taking the next best action off the back of those requests. And that just means that the request gets serviced much more quickly, but it also removes some of that manual work. So yeah, those are some of the biggest use cases and kind of most repetitive kind of use cases we have.
Great example. Thank you. So Ed, let's wrap up our discussion with this question. Could you just talk about what the future looks like for natural language processing and what are some of the ways you expect it to evolve?
It's hard to predict, really, because I think so. There are a whole bunch of kind of tests that people use to benchmark the performance of these natural language processing algorithms. And they take these tests, right, and they give them to people and say, okay, well, how well does a person do at these natural language processing tests, right? And then that's your kind of yardstick. Can these algorithms do as good as people, right? So there's these tests called like GLUE. GLUE is an abbreviation for it. Right. And for many years, researchers thought, okay, we'll never get to as good as the humans, right? And then again, 18 months ago, these transformer-based architectures started beating humans in these tests, right? And so they've had to create harder tests. And now the algorithms are beating these harder tests. So I think but that's in research, right? And so I think there's a really interesting question is how does this hit the economy, and how are products shaped around this kind of raw technology, this raw capability? We have an opinion on that, right? And it's kind of encoded in our design of the product. But I think how that gets productized and distributed, and how the economy kind of internalizes that raw capability is kind of interesting. I think with where NLP goes, it's almost like the ultimate AI kind of question. NLP is goes to the heart of the AI question, really. Are we going to have truly intelligent machines? And I don't know. I don't know. I could flip between the two things of researchers, machine learning researchers often laugh it off as a kind of something that would happen. Yeah. And then there's this other kind of diehard set, the Elon Musks and those kind of guys, which say it's 18 months away, Right. So I don't know. We'll see. Only the most exciting time ever in the field of
Yeah, no doubt. Well, I really appreciate your time today. It's been an interesting conversation, and I can just in my head envision so many different ways that Blue Prism and Reinfer can combine to deliver tremendous value. So it's great having you as a partner of Blue Prism, and thank you for your insights and your time today, and be well.
It was really great being here. Thanks for having me, Brad.
Thanks for tuning in to Transform Now. For more insightful discussions on digital transformation and more, check out our podcast channel where you'll find all of our previous episodes. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast player. And if you like what you heard, please leave us a review. For more information about digital transformation and the future of work, check out blueprism.com to learn how Blue Prism's digital workforce is enabling enterprise transformation now.